They say you can never truly know someone until you see them break. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the person breaking looks exactly like you. My name is Amber Hall. I'm 28 years old. I work as a nurse in the geriatric ward at County General Hospital. I take care of people at the end of their lives, people who have stories they never got to finish, regrets they carry like stones in their pockets. But tonight, standing at my apartment door in the middle of a thunderstorm, I realized I'd been ignoring the most important story of all, the one written on my sister's face. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I remember because I'd just gotten off a double shift, and I was staring at the clock on my microwave, watching the numbers change, feeling that bone-deep exhaustion that comes from 12 hours of other people's pain. I'd pulled off my scrubs, thrown them in the hamper, and was about to collapse on my couch when I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. The kind of knocking that doesn't say hello, it says help. I wasn't expecting anyone. My circle is small by choice. After years of working in healthcare, you learn that most people don't really want to be saved. They want someone to witness their suffering, to validate it, to say yes, this is real, what's happening to you matters. But saving? That's different. That requires both parties to be willing. And most people, I've learned, are more comfortable with their pain than with the uncertainty of freedom. I opened the door and there she was, Claire. My twin sister, my mirror image. Except the reflection was all wrong. Her hair was plastered to her skull from the rain, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivers. Her left eye was swollen, a deep purple that spread across her cheekbone like spilled wine. Her lip was split, a thin line of dried blood crusting at the corner. She was wearing a designer coat, the kind that costs more than my monthly rent, but it hung off her shoulders like she'd forgotten how to wear it, like she'd forgotten how to inhabit her own skin. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, water dripping onto my welcome mat. And I understood why she couldn't speak. Because once you say it out loud, once you name the thing that's destroying you, it becomes real in a way it wasn't before. It stops being something you can pretend away, rationalize, explain. It becomes a truth you have to act on. I pulled her inside. She moved like a ghost, like someone who wasn't quite sure they were still allowed to take up space in the world. I grabbed towels, started to help her out of the wet coat, and that's when I saw them, the bruises, not just on her face, on her arms, her collarbone, her wrists. Some were fresh, purple and angry. Others were older, fading to yellow and green, a timeline of violence written on her body. My hands were shaking as I wrapped the towel around her shoulders. I'm a nurse. I've seen this before. I've documented these injuries in patient charts, used careful, clinical language, contusions consistent with blunt force trauma, defensive wounds on the forearms, pattern injuries suggesting repeated incidents. But this was different. This was my sister, my twin, the person who shares my DNA, my face, my history. Seeing those marks on her body felt like seeing them on my own. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He took everything, Amber. My phone, my bank cards. He changed all the passwords. I can't access anything. I haven't talked to anyone in 3 months except him and the people he approves of. Even Mom thinks I'm just busy with the new house. He's so good at this. He makes it look like love, like protection. But it's a cage, a beautiful, expensive cage. I wanted to ask who, but I already knew. Brandon Carter, her husband, the man she'd married 2 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than most people make in a year. The successful community lawyer who volunteers at the food bank and coaches Little League on weekends. The man who always knows exactly what to say, how to make you feel like you're the most important person in the room. I'd never liked him. There was something too smooth about him, too controlled. But Claire had been so happy, or at least, She'd seemed happy. Now I understood. She'd been performing happiness, the way you perform any other survival skill. I led her to the couch, wrapped her in blankets, made her tea she didn't drink. She sat there, staring at nothing. And I realized she was dissociating. Her body was here, but her mind had gone somewhere else, somewhere safer. I'd seen this in my patients, the ones who'd experienced trauma. The mind's way of protecting itself when the present becomes unbearable. I called the only person I knew who might be able to help, Helen Grant. She was a woman from my church, though calling it my church feels generous. I go maybe once a month, more for the community than the theology. But Helen, she was different. She'd been a lawyer once, high-powered, successful. Then her younger sister had been destroyed by an abusive partner, and Helen had walked away from everything. Now she ran a women's advocacy group out of her home, helping survivors navigate the legal system, find resources, rebuild their lives. Helen arrived within 20 minutes, even though it was past midnight. She took one look at Claire and knew exactly what we were dealing with. She'd seen it 1,000 times before. The vacant eyes, the way Claire flinched when I moved too quickly, the way she kept touching her ring finger, where a wedding band should have been, but wasn't. Helen sat down across from Claire, her voice gentle but firm. "Claire, I need you to hear me right now. What's happening to you? It has a name. It's called intimate partner violence, and it's not your fault. It's never your fault. But right now, we need to focus on keeping you safe. Can you do that with me?" Claire nodded slowly, like she was waking up from a long sleep. Helen continued, "We're not going to talk about revenge. We're not going to talk about making him pay. Right now, we're only going to talk about survival, about living correctly, about reclaiming your right to exist without fear. Everything else comes later." I watched Helen work, and I understood why she was good at this. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She didn't say it would be easy or quick or fair. She just said it was possible. And sometimes, possibility is enough. After Helen left with a plan to return in the morning, I sat with Claire in the quiet of my apartment. The rain had stopped, and through my window I could see the streetlights reflecting in the puddles below. I caught our reflection in the mirror hanging by the door, two identical faces, but one of them looked haunted, hollowed out, and I couldn't tell which one was which. Claire's voice broke the silence. "Do you remember when we were kids and we used to play that game? We'd stand in front of Mom's full-length mirror and try to figure out which one was real and which one was the reflection. We'd move at the same time, talk at the same time, and we'd convince ourselves that maybe there was no difference. Maybe we were both reflections, or both real." I remembered. We'd do it for hours until Mom would call us for dinner and break the spell. Yeah, I remember. I look at myself now and I don't recognize the person looking back. It's like he took my reflection and replaced it with someone else. Someone scared, someone small, and I don't know how to get her back. I moved to sit beside her, took her hand carefully, mindful of the bruises. "Then we'll find her together. Because she's still in there, Claire. She's just been hidden, and we're going to bring her back into the light." She started to cry then, not the silent tears from before, but deep, wrenching gasps that shook her whole body. I held her while she broke apart, and I thought about all the patients I'd cared for who had no one to hold them when they broke. All the women I'd seen in the emergency room with injuries they wouldn't explain, with stories that didn't quite add up. I'd documented their wounds, but I'd never intervened. I'd told myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't know the full situation, that maybe I was wrong, but I wasn't wrong. I'd been a coward. And now my sister was paying the price for my cowardice, for the cowardice of everyone who'd ever looked away. Before she fell asleep on my couch, exhausted from crying, Claire did something that would change everything. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her wedding ring. It was obscene, really. A 3-carat diamond that caught the light and threw it around the room like tiny knives. She held it up, stared at it for a long moment, then handed it to me. "Keep this. I don't ever want to see it again." Every time I looked at it, I thought about promises. About for better or worse. About how leaving would make me a failure. But you know what? I'd rather be a failure than not alive. I took the ring, feeling its weight in my palm. It was heavier than it looked. I put it in my pocket and felt it there, a small, hard reminder of everything that was about to begin. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up, checking on Claire, making sure she was still breathing, still there. And every time I passed that mirror by my door, I stopped and looked. Helen's words kept echoing in my head. "If you really want to help, let light into that house. Let light into the dark places, the places where secrets grow like mold." I thought about Brandon's house, the massive colonial he'd bought after the wedding, the one Claire had decorated with such care. I'd been there for dinner parties, holiday gatherings. It was always perfect, spotlessly clean, carefully curated, the kind of house you see in magazines, where everything has a place and nothing is out of order. I'd thought it was beautiful. Now I understood it was a museum, a mausoleum, a place where real life wasn't allowed to happen. And I knew what I had to do. I had to go back into that house, not as a guest, not as the sister-in-law making nice at family dinners, but as someone willing to look in the dark corners, to see what was really there. Because Claire had gotten out, but she'd left pieces of herself behind. And we were going to need those pieces. We were going to need proof. As dawn broke, gray light filtering through my curtains, I made a decision. I looked at my reflection one more time, and this time, I knew which one was real. I was done being afraid. The war for Claire's freedom, for her very soul, had begun, and I would not let Brandon Carter win. The morning after Claire appeared at my door felt like waking up in someone else's life. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, lying smoothly to my supervisor about a stomach virus. But there was nothing smooth about what I was really doing. I was preparing to walk back into the house where my sister had been systematically destroyed, to gather evidence against a man who thought he was untouchable. Helen returned at 8 with coffee and determination written across her face. She'd brought resources, domestic violence hotlines printed on discreet cards, legal aid contacts, information about safe houses. But more than that, she brought a plan. "Claire needs to disappear for a while," Helen said, spreading documents across my coffee table. "Somewhere Brandon can't find her, can't manipulate her, can't use his charm and connections to pull her back in. I have a safe house. It's not luxurious, but it's secure. And there are other women there, women who understand what she's going through." Claire had showered and borrowed my clothes, but she still looked like a shell of herself. "What about my things? My documents? Everything I own is in that house." "That's where Amber comes in," Helen said, turning to me. "You're going to go get them. You're her sister. It's perfectly reasonable for you to offer to collect her belongings. Brandon can't refuse without looking suspicious." I felt my stomach tighten. The thought of facing Brandon, of walking back into that perfect house knowing what I now knew, made my skin crawl. But I nodded. "When?" "Today. The sooner the better. We need to document those injuries, get Claire to a doctor, start building a paper trail. But we also need her personal documents, her passport, her birth certificate. Brandon has probably locked them away, and without them, she can't rebuild her life." Helen walked us through what would happen next. First, photographs of Claire's injuries, taken with timestamps and proper lighting. then a visit to the hospital for medical documentation, then filing for an emergency protection order. Each step carefully planned, each piece of evidence meticulously gathered. "This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint," Helen warned. "Brandon is a lawyer. He knows how the system works. And he'll use every trick in the book to avoid consequences. We have to be smarter, more patient, more thorough than he is." After Helen left with Claire, taking her to the safe house and then to the hospital, I sat alone in my apartment and planned my approach. I needed Brandon to trust me, to see me as an ally rather than a threat. So I crafted a text message carefully, making it sound concerned, but neutral. "Brandon, it's Amber. I heard Claire is staying with me for a few days. She seems really upset. I'm worried about both of you. Would it be okay if I stop by to grab some of her things? I think she just needs some space to cool down. Maybe I can talk some sense into her." His response came within minutes. "Amber, thank you. I'm so worried about her. She's not thinking clearly. Yes, please come by around 2. Maybe you can help her see that we can work through this. I love her so much." I stared at those words. I love her so much. The same words every abuser uses. Love as justification. Love as excuse. Love as weapon. At 1:50, I pulled up to the house on Maple Street. It looked exactly as I remembered. White colonial perfection, black shutters, manicured lawn. The American dream incarnate. But now I saw it differently. Now I saw the prison beneath the paint. Brandon answered the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was handsome in that catalog way, all clean lines and expensive grooming. He was wearing business casual, like he'd just stepped out of a meeting, though I knew he worked from home. "Amber, come in. Thank you so much for coming. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thanks. I just want to grab some things for Claire and get back to her. She's pretty shaken up." His expression shifted into concerned husband mode. "I'm sure she is. She gets like this sometimes, you know. Emotional. Overwhelmed. I've been trying to get her to see someone, a therapist. But she gets defensive. Like I'm saying something's wrong with her." There it was. The setup. Planting seeds of doubt about Claire's mental state, creating a narrative where he was the caring husband and she was the unstable wife. I'd seen this pattern in my nursing work, the way abusers laid groundwork for their defense long before anyone accused them of anything. "I'll just head upstairs and pack a bag for her," I said, moving toward the stairs before he could offer to help. "Her things are in the master bedroom, end of the hall. Take whatever she needs." I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding, acutely aware that Brandon was somewhere below me, that I was in his territory, his domain. The hallway was long, lined with photographs of Brandon and Claire at various events. In every picture, Claire was smiling, but now I could see it wasn't reaching her eyes. She was performing, even in photographs. The master bedroom was exactly as Claire had described it. Spotless. The bed made with military precision. Curtains drawn to keep out natural light. And there, on her nightstand, was her phone. I picked it up, but the battery was completely gone. I tucked it into the bag anyway. Evidence. I started gathering clothes from her closet, moving quickly but carefully, and that's when I saw it. The dresser. The bottom drawer slightly ajar. Something made me pull it open fully, and there, hidden under a stack of sweaters, was a journal. My hands trembled as I opened it. Page after page of Claire's handwriting, dates, times, descriptions that made my blood run cold. March 15th. He locked me out of the bedroom for 3 hours because I didn't have dinner ready when he got home from his meeting. When he finally let me in, he acted like nothing happened. Like I was crazy for being upset. April 2nd. Found out he's been reading my emails. All of them. He admitted it when I confronted him. said married people shouldn't have secrets, that if I had nothing to hide, I shouldn't mind. May 20th. He grabbed my arm so hard during an argument that I couldn't lift anything with my left hand for 2 days. He said it was my fault for trying to walk away while he was still talking, that I was being disrespectful. There were photographs too, tucked between pages, bruises on her arms, a split lip, a black eye. She'd been documenting everything, building a case even when she didn't think anyone would believe her. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly shoved the journal into my bag, covering it with clothes. Brandon appeared in the doorway, and I realized I'd been in the room too long. Finding everything okay? His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. Yeah, just making sure I get enough for a few days. You know how particular Claire can be about her clothes? He stepped into the room, and suddenly the space felt much smaller. You know, Amber, I've always liked you. You're practical, level-headed, not dramatic like Claire can be. Maybe you can help her understand that marriage takes work, that you can't just run away when things get difficult. I met his eyes, forcing myself not to look away, not to show fear. What exactly happened, Brandon? Claire showed up at my door pretty upset. His expression shifted, and for just a moment, I saw something cold beneath the charm. We had an argument, a bad one. She'd been drinking, which she does more than she should, and she got hysterical. Started saying crazy things, accusing me of things I never did. I tried to calm her down, but she worked herself up into a state and stormed out. I've been calling her, but she won't answer. I'm worried she's going to hurt herself. There it was again. The narrative. Claire drinks too much. Claire is hysterical. Claire might hurt herself. Every word calculated to make her seem unstable, to make him seem like the victim of her instability. I'll talk to her, I said, shouldering the bag. But Brandon, those bruises on her face, how did those happen? He didn't miss a beat. She fell. She'd been drinking, like I said, and she lost her balance coming down the stairs. I tried to catch her, but I couldn't get there in time. She hit the banister. I felt terrible about it. I wanted to take her to the hospital, but she refused. The lie was smooth, practiced. The kind of lie you tell when you've told it many times before, and I realized that this wasn't new. This had been happening for years, and Brandon had been perfecting his story the entire time. I moved toward the door, toward escape, but his voice stopped me. You know what's funny, Amber? You and Claire, you look so much alike, but you're so different. She's always been weak, needy, but you're strong, independent. I bet you've never let a man control you. The words hung in the air, and I understood the threat beneath them. He was telling me he saw Claire as weak, as someone he could control, and he was warning me not to interfere. I should go. Claire's waiting. As I walked down the stairs, I felt his eyes on me the whole way. When I reached the front door, he called out, "Tell her I love her. Tell her I just want her to come home so we can fix this." I drove away without responding, my hands shaking on the wheel. Only when I was 3 blocks away did I pull over and let myself breathe. I'd done it. I'd gotten the journal, the phone, evidence that would help build a case against him. But I'd also seen something that terrified me. Brandon truly believed his own lies. He'd convinced himself that he was the victim, that Claire was the problem, that everything he did was justified. And that made him more dangerous than I'd imagined. I drove straight to Helen's office, where she was waiting with Officer Michael Lewis, a cop she'd worked with on previous domestic violence cases. He was in his mid-40s, with kind eyes that had seen too much, and a no-nonsense demeanor that inspired confidence. I handed over the bag with the journal and phone. There's more. A lot more. She documented years of this. Photographs, dates, everything. Helen and Officer Lewis began carefully reviewing the contents. With each page they read, their expressions grew darker. Finally, Helen looked up at me. This is good. This is very good. With this level of documentation, combined with the medical report from Claire's hospital visit, we can file for an emergency protective order today. And we can start building a criminal case. Will it be enough? I asked, needing reassurance. Officer Lewis spoke up. In domestic violence cases, documentation is everything. Too often, it's just he said, she said. But Claire kept records. She took pictures. She created a timeline. This gives us something concrete to work with. It won't be easy, and Brandon will fight back hard, but we have a real shot at holding him accountable. That evening, I visited Claire at the safe house. It was a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, indistinguishable from the houses around it. Inside, it was clean but worn, furnished with donated items and the kind of practical furniture that prioritized function over style. Claire was in a small bedroom on the second floor, sitting on the bed and staring out the window. When I came in, she looked up, and I saw that some color had returned to her face. The hospital had given her pain medication for her injuries and connected her with a crisis counselor. I got your journal, I said, sitting beside her. And your phone, and some clothes and documents. She was quiet for a long moment. You read it, didn't you? The journal? Some of it. I'm so sorry, Claire. I had no idea it was this bad. No one did. That was the point. He's so careful, so calculated. Every time something happened, he had an explanation. I fell. I was clumsy. I was drinking. After a while, I started to believe it. Started to think maybe I was the problem. You're not the problem. You were never the problem. She turned to look at me, and I saw tears streaming down her face. Do you know what the worst part is? I still love him. Or at least, I love who I thought he was. The man I married. The one who was charming and attentive and made me feel special. That man never existed, did he? It was all an act, a performance to get me to trust him so he could control me. I didn't have an answer for that. Because she was right. The man she'd fallen in love with had been a carefully constructed fiction, designed to trap her in a relationship where she'd have no power and no escape. Helen says we can file for a protective order tomorrow, I said. It will legally require Brandon to stay away from you. If he violates it, he goes to jail. He won't violate it. He's too smart for that. He'll find other ways to get to me. Through my friends, my family, my reputation. He'll make sure everyone thinks I'm lying, that I'm crazy, that I'm trying to destroy him. Let him try. We have evidence now. We have your journal, your medical records, photographs. We have the truth on our side. But even as I said it, I wondered if the truth would be enough. Because I'd seen how convincing Brandon was, how easily he lied, how smoothly he manipulated reality to fit his narrative. And I knew that the legal system, for all its supposed fairness, often favored people like him. People with money, with connections, with the ability to hire expensive lawyers and expert witnesses. The next morning, Helen filed for an emergency protective order on Claire's behalf. The hearing was scheduled for that afternoon, expedited due to the severity of the documented injuries. Brandon was served with the order and notified of the hearing. We all gathered in the courthouse, an imposing building downtown with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Claire was terrified, barely able to speak, but Helen stayed close to her, whispering reassurances. When Brandon arrived with his attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit, I saw Claire physically recoil. She hadn't seen him since the night she'd fled, and the sight of him brought back all the fear she'd been trying to overcome. The hearing was brief, but intense. Helen presented the medical records, the photographs from Claire's journal, and Officer Lewis's statement about the credibility of the evidence. Brandon's attorney argued that this was a misunderstanding, that Claire had mental health issues, that she was exaggerating normal marital conflict. But the judge, An older woman who'd clearly seen this pattern before wasn't buying it. She looked at the photographs of Claire's injuries, read excerpts from the journal, and then looked directly at Brandon. "Mr. Carter, based on the evidence presented, I'm granting an emergency protective order. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from Ms. Clare Hall at all times. You are not to contact her directly or indirectly. You are not to go near her residence, place of employment, or any location where you know or should know she might be. This order is effective immediately and will remain in place until a full hearing can be scheduled. Do you understand?" Brandon's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." As we left the courthouse, I saw Brandon standing on the steps, watching us. His expression wasn't angry or sad. It was calculating. He was already planning his next move, figuring out how to regain control despite the legal barriers now in place. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, that this was far from over. The protective order was just a piece of paper. And Brandon Carter had never let rules stop him before. That night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I thought about mirrors again. About how Claire had looked at herself and seen only what Brandon wanted her to see. Weak. Broken. Wrong. And I thought about how I'd looked at myself and seen someone who stayed silent when she should have spoken up. But things were different now. The silence was broken. The truth was coming to light. And no matter what Brandon did next, Claire would never be alone in that house of shadows again. The protective order had been in place for 5 days when Brandon made his first countermove, not by violating the order directly. That would be too obvious, too easy to prosecute. Instead, he went after Claire's credibility in a way that was perfectly legal and devastatingly effective. He filed a formal complaint with the state nursing board against me, claiming I had violated patient confidentiality laws by using my medical knowledge to create false documentation of Claire's injuries. The complaint was baseless, a transparent attempt to punish me for helping my sister, but it didn't matter. Once filed, it had to be investigated. The letter arrived on a gray Monday morning, official and cold. "Your nursing license has been temporarily suspended pending investigation of allegations of professional misconduct." I read it 3 times, each time feeling the words hit like physical blows. I called Helen immediately. "He's coming after me now. He filed a complaint against my nursing license." Her sigh was heavy with recognition. "That's his pattern. When he can't control the primary target, he goes after the support system. He wants to isolate Claire again by making everyone around her too afraid to help." "Will it work?" "Not if we don't let it. The complaint will be investigated and dismissed. But in the meantime, yes, you won't be able to work." "I'm sorry, Amber. This is exactly the kind of retaliation we were trying to avoid." But it wasn't just the loss of income, though. That was terrifying enough. It was the violation of it. Brandon had reached into my professional life, the identity I'd built over years of education and hard work, and threatened to destroy it with a few paragraphs of lies. And he'd done it without violating the protective order, without even speaking to Claire directly. When I told Claire what had happened, she broke down. "This is my fault. He's punishing you because of me. Maybe I should just drop everything. Tell them I made it all up. Let him win so he stops hurting the people I love." I grabbed her shoulders, made her look at me. "That's exactly what he wants. He wants you to feel so guilty about the collateral damage that you give up. But this isn't your fault. This is his choice. He's choosing to retaliate. He's choosing to try to destroy anyone who stands with you, and we're choosing not to back down." But it was getting harder to maintain that resolve, because Brandon's second move came 3 days later, and it was even more calculated. He hired a private investigator to dig into Claire's past, looking for anything embarrassing, anything that could be used to paint her as unstable or vindictive. The investigator contacted Claire's college roommate, spinning a story about a documentary. He called her former employers, claiming to verify employment dates. He even reached out to an ex-boyfriend from years ago, asking leading questions designed to elicit negative responses. And then, Brandon's attorney released a statement to the local press. Our investigation has revealed a pattern of instability and attention-seeking behavior in Mrs. Carter's past. We have documentation of mental health struggles, failed relationships, and a history of making false accusations when things don't go her way. We believe Mr. Carter is the victim of a malicious campaign to destroy his reputation. The local newspaper ran a story. Not the essay Clare had written, which they'd ignored, but Brandon's version of events. Local lawyer fights false accusations. The article was sympathetic to Brandon, painting him as a successful professional whose life was being ruined by an unstable ex-wife. The comments section was brutal. People who'd never met Clare, who knew nothing about what she'd endured, felt entitled to judge her. She's probably just after his money. Bitter women always make false accusations. Another man's life destroyed by lies. I watched Clare read those comments, watched her face crumple with each hateful word, and I felt rage building in my chest. This was what abusers did. They used society's skepticism of women against their victims. They weaponized the tendency to believe successful men over traumatized women. And it worked, because people wanted to believe that domestic violence happened to other people, in other neighborhoods, with other families, not here. Not with someone they knew. We need to fight back, I said to Helen when we met that evening. We can't just sit here and let him control the narrative. Helen's expression was grim. I agree, but we have to be strategic. If we respond emotionally, if we get drawn into a public mudslinging match, we play into his hands. He wants us to look unstable, vindictive. We need to stay focused on the legal case and let the evidence speak. What if the evidence isn't enough? What if people believe his version instead of the truth? Then we make sure they hear Clare's voice directly, not filtered through lawyers or news articles, her actual voice, her actual story. That's when Helen proposed the idea that would change everything. We would record Brandon, not secretly, which would be illegal, but openly, with my full knowledge that I was documenting our conversation. Illinois was a one-party consent state, which meant as long as I was part of the conversation, I could legally record it without telling him. You're going to meet with Brandon, Helen explained, as Claire's sister trying to mediate, trying to understand his side, and you're going to ask him questions. Open-ended questions that let him explain himself. And he will. Because men like Brandon love to justify their actions. They genuinely believe they're right, that they're the victims. Give him room to talk, and he'll provide all the evidence we need. The plan made my stomach churn, but I understood the logic. Brandon thought I was weak, that I was a potential ally who could be manipulated. He'd already tried to cultivate me during my visit to the house. If I reached out to him, expressed doubt about Clare's account, suggested I wanted to hear his side, he'd jump at the chance to win me over. Helen coached me for hours. What to say, what questions to ask, how to stay calm even if he said horrible things, and most importantly, how to stay safe. We'd meet in a public restaurant. Helen and Officer Lewis would be nearby, watching. If anything went wrong, if Brandon became threatening, they'd intervene immediately. I sent Brandon a text message that made me feel sick to write. Brandon, I'm so confused about everything that's happening. Clare is saying one thing, but I keep thinking about how she's always been dramatic. Would you be willing to meet with me? I want to understand your side. Maybe I can help fix this. His response came within minutes. Amber, thank you. I've been hoping you'd reach out. Clare is lucky to have you, even if she doesn't realize it right now. Let's meet for dinner tomorrow. I'll explain everything. The next evening, I sat across from Brandon at an upscale restaurant downtown. He'd chosen a place with white tablecloths and soft lighting, where conversations happened in hushed tones. The recording device in my jacket pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I really appreciate you coming," Brandon said, his expression earnest. "I know this has been hard on everyone, especially you. Being caught in the middle of your sister's breakdown." I forced myself to nod sympathetically. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." Claire showed up at my door pretty hurt, but she does tend to exaggerate things. Brandon leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "She does. She always has. And I love her, Amber. I really do. But her mental health has been declining for months, maybe years. I've been trying to get her help, but she refuses to admit there's a problem." "What kind of mental health issues?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Anxiety, depression, paranoid thinking." She became convinced I was controlling her, monitoring her, trying to isolate her from friends and family. But the truth is, I was just trying to protect her from herself. She makes impulsive decisions. She spends money we don't have. She trusts people she shouldn't. I had to step in. Step in how? Well, I took over managing our finances because she was making bad choices. I kept track of who she was talking to because some of her friends were toxic influences. I made sure she was safe, that she wasn't putting herself in dangerous situations. Is that controlling? Or is that what any husband would do for someone he loves? I felt bile rising in my throat, but kept my expression neutral. "She mentioned something about you taking her phone." His expression flickered with irritation before the mask slid back into place. "I didn't take it. We agreed to have a technology-free weekend to focus on us, on our marriage. But she turned it into this story about me confiscating her property. That's what I mean about her mental state. She takes normal things and twists them into something sinister." "And the bruises on her face?" "She fell. She'd been drinking, which has become a problem recently, and she lost her balance. I tried to help her, but she pushed me away. Then she ran out of the house and apparently told everyone I hit her. Amber, I would never hurt Claire. I love her more than anything." The words sounded so reasonable, so sincere. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't seen Claire's journal or the photographs or the terror in her eyes, I might have believed him. And that was the most chilling thing. Brandon believed his own lies. He'd constructed a reality where he was the hero and Claire was the villain, and he'd convinced himself it was true. I leaned forward slightly. "But if she really wanted to leave, if she really wanted a divorce, you'd let her go, right? You'd let her access her money and start over?" His expression hardened, and for just a second I saw the real Brandon. The one Claire had been living with. "Why would I let her leave? We're married. We made vows. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. She doesn't get to just walk away because she's having a mental health crisis. That's not how marriage works. Even if she's unhappy, she's not unhappy. She's mentally ill. There's a difference. And as her husband, it's my responsibility to make sure she gets help, even if she doesn't want it, even if I have to force her." There it was, the admission we needed. Not I hit her or I controlled her, but something almost more damning. His fundamental belief that he had the right to force Claire to do what he wanted. That her autonomy, her choices, her feelings didn't matter compared to his interpretation of marriage vows. I pushed a little further. "What about the money? She says she can't access any of your bank accounts." "Our bank accounts," he corrected. "And of course she can access them. She just needs to ask me first. I keep track of our finances. I make sure we're living within our means. If she wants money, she just needs to tell me what it's for. That's how partnerships work." "But what if she wanted money to leave? To get her own apartment?" His smile disappeared completely. "Then I'd say no, because that's not a reasonable use of our money. She's my wife. Her place is with me. And if she tries to leave, if she tries to destroy what we've built together, I'll make sure she regrets it." "How would you do that?" "I'm a lawyer, Amber. I know how the system works. I know how to make someone look unstable in court. I know how to drag out proceedings until they run out of money for attorneys. I know how to make their life so miserable that they wish they'd never started this. And that's exactly what I'll do if Claire doesn't come to her senses and come home." The threat was clear, unambiguous, and perfectly recorded. I'd gotten what we needed, but I couldn't resist one more question. "You said you love her. How is any of this love?" Brandon's expression turned cold. "Love isn't always gentle, Amber. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it means making hard choices for someone who can't make them for themselves. Claire needs me. She's nothing without me. And deep down, she knows that. This whole charade she's putting on, with the protective order and the accusations, it's just her way of getting attention. Eventually, she'll realize she can't survive without me, and she'll come back. They always do." I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. "I don't think she's coming back, Brandon. I think she's finally realized that being alone is better than being with someone who sees her as property." His eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I believe her. Every word. And I'm going to help her make sure everyone else believes her too." I walked out of that restaurant with Brandon calling after me, his voice rising, his control finally slipping. And as soon as I was outside, I called Helen. "I got it. All of it." He admitted to controlling her finances, to monitoring her, to threatening her. He said he'd make her life miserable if she didn't come back. "It's all on tape." Helen's voice was tight with emotion. "Good. Meet me at my office. We're taking this straight to the district attorney. This, combined with everything else, is enough to press criminal charges. Brandon Carter is going down." But as I drove through the dark streets toward Helen's office, I felt a chill run down my spine. Because I'd seen Brandon's face when his mask slipped. I'd seen the cold calculation in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he would win because he always won. And I wondered if we really had enough. If any amount of evidence would be sufficient to overcome the advantage of being a well-connected man in a system designed to protect people like him. That night, Claire listened to the recording with tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of validation. For the first time, someone else had heard what she'd been hearing for years. The casual cruelty, the sense of ownership, the complete absence of empathy or respect. "That's him," she whispered. "That's exactly who he is when no one else is watching. Thank you for believing me enough to hear it." Officer Lewis took the recording and began the process of having it formally authenticated. Patricia Marsh, the assistant district attorney, reviewed it alongside all the other evidence we'd gathered. And 3 days later, criminal charges were filed against Brandon Carter. 3 counts of domestic battery, 2 counts of unlawful restraint, 1 count of intimidation, multiple counts of violating a protective order through proxy, and 1 count of coercive control. A relatively new charge that recognized psychological abuse as a crime. The arraignment was scheduled for the following week. And for the first time since Claire had knocked on my door, I allowed myself to hope that justice might actually be served, that the truth might actually matter, that Brandon Carter might actually face consequences for what he'd done. But I should have known better, because men like Brandon don't go down without a fight. And the fight was about to get much, much worse. 2 days after the charges, Brandon Carter's bail hearing drew a crowd. His attorney argued he was a respected lawyer, a pillar of the community, no flight risk. Despite the recording of his threats, the judge agreed. Bail was set at $50,000, pocket change for Brandon. Within an hour, he was free. Free and furious. And with men like Brandon, anger is just another weapon. The restraining order technically kept him away from Claire. But that didn't stop him from waging war online. Within days, fake accounts spread rumors that Clare was unstable, vindictive, jealous of his success, after his money. Lies repeated until they sounded like truth. Then came the countersuit. $2 million for defamation. A sum meant not to collect, but to crush. To remind Clare he still controlled the narrative. And it was working. Every headline, every whisper pushed her deeper into despair. "He's going to win," she said one night, voice hollow. "He always does. I should have stayed. It would have been easier if I was the only one hurt." Helen tried to keep her strong, but even she was strained. Brandon had filed complaints against Helen's nonprofit for harboring a fugitive. Baseless, but exhausting. My own nursing license was still under review. Officer Lewis had been pulled off the case for being too invested. Patricia Marsh, the prosecutor, faced pressure to offer a plea deal and bury the scandal. Brandon was dismantling us piece by piece, using the legal system as his weapon. He didn't need to break the restraining order. He just needed to make our lives unbearable. Then something shifted. Jessica, an ex-girlfriend who'd read Claire's essay, called Helen. "I can't testify in person," she said, voice trembling. "But I want my story on record." Within a week, 2 more exes came forward, each writing sworn statements describing the same pattern: charm, control, abuse. "This changes everything," Patricia said. "1 victim can be dismissed. 4 prove a pattern." But the most unexpected help came from someone we never thought we'd see again: Claire's mother, Dorothy. Dorothy had sided with Brandon early on, calling Clare unstable. But one morning she appeared at the safe house, face lined with guilt. Clare froze, expecting another betrayal. Instead, Dorothy whispered, "I'm sorry. I was wrong." She sank into a chair. "When Brandon told me you were having a breakdown, I believed him. He was so convincing. But I kept remembering your college boyfriend, Marcus. You left him suddenly and wouldn't say why. Later, I learned he'd been arrested for hitting someone else. When Brandon said you had a history of false accusations, I believed him because of Marcus. But you never lied. You just never told the truth because you were ashamed." She pulled out a folder of family photos. "I found these. I looked closer this time." In each picture, Brandon's hand clamped on Claire's shoulder, his grip hard enough to leave dents, her smile forced, her body angled subtly away. "I should have seen it," Dorothy said through tears. "I wanted to believe you were happy. I let his charm blind me. But I see it now. And I'll testify. I'll tell them how he fooled me, how I failed you." Clare broke down sobbing, and her mother held her. It was the first real healing I'd seen between them in years. Patricia incorporated the new evidence: the ex's statements, the photographs, Dorothy's testimony. "Now we tell the full story," she said. "A man who spent 15 years destroying women and thought he'd never be caught." The trial was 6 weeks away. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. Not naive hope. Earned hope, built on evidence and solidarity. But Brandon wasn't finished. 5 days before trial, he hired a private investigator, officially to document Claire's behavior for court, to prove she wasn't traumatized. In reality, it was stalking dressed as strategy. The man followed Clare to therapy, to support groups, to the grocery store, snapping photos, taking notes, logging her every move. Then he made a mistake. One evening outside her support group, he approached her. Not violently, just close enough to speak. Close enough to break the order. Clare panicked. She ran to her car, locked the doors, and called Officer Lewis. By the time he arrived, the man was gone. But the parking lot cameras had caught everything: his approach, her fear, her flight. Lewis traced the investigator back to Brandon's attorney. Phone records proved Brandon himself had coordinated the surveillance. It was indirect contact, a clear violation of the restraining order. That same afternoon, Judge Morrison called an emergency hearing. Brandon was brought in cuffed and furious. "Mr. Carter," the judge said coldly, "you were told you could have no direct or indirect contact with the victim. You hired someone to stalk her. You broke the law." His lawyer claimed it was a misunderstanding, evidence gathering. The judge wasn't buying it. "This wasn't investigation, it was intimidation. You've weaponized the legal process. I revoke your bail. You'll remain in custody until trial. And I'm adding charges of stalking by proxy and witness intimidation." The room erupted. Brandon shouted about injustice, claiming it was all a setup. The bailiffs dragged him out as he raged. Claire watched, shaking. Then a slow, stunned calm settled over her. "He can't hurt me anymore," she whispered. "He's in jail. He can't call. He can't send people. I'm safe." That night we gathered at Helen's. Me, Claire, Dorothy, Officer Lewis, Patricia. Pizza boxes covered the table. For the first time in months, we exhaled. "What now?" Claire asked. Patricia smiled. "Now we prepare. Now we make sure the jury sees him for what he is. And yes, he'll fight dirty. His lawyer will attack your credibility, your sanity. It'll be brutal." Claire met her eyes. "I know. But I'm not the same woman I was when I lived with him. Back then I doubted myself. Now I know the truth. I'm not crazy. I'm not weak. And I'm done letting him define me." I watched her as she spoke. The fear was still there, but beneath it burned something fierce and unyielding. She wasn't the fragile woman who'd shown up at my door soaked in rain, trembling and broken. She was the woman who'd survived, who'd gathered allies, faced a monster, and refused to disappear. And I thought again of mirrors. How for years, Claire's reflection had been shaped by his manipulation. How he'd made her believe she was small, fragile, unlovable. Now, for the first time, she could look at herself and see the truth. Strong, brave, whole. The mirror hadn't changed. She had. It had always told the truth. It had just taken her this long to finally believe it. The courthouse was packed the morning Brandon Carter's trial began. Cameras lined the steps, hungry for shots of the once celebrated lawyer now accused of domestic abuse. Inside, two camps faced each other. His colleagues defending him, and survivors supporting Claire, the woman who'd finally made him answer for what he'd done. I sat in the front row beside Dorothy. Claire was at the prosecution table in a navy suit, calm on the surface but trembling beneath. When Brandon entered, orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, the room rippled with shock. Gone was the charming attorney. In his place stood an exposed predator still trying to project control. Judge Morrison entered. Patricia Marsh's opening was razor sharp. "This case is about power. A man who thought he owned his wife, who recorded his control like trophies, and who weaponized his profession to terrorize her." Brandon's lawyer, Richard Thornton, painted him as the real victim, a devoted husband smeared by a mentally unstable wife. The first day was clinical. Doctors describing injuries, IT experts detailing surveillance, accountants tracing hidden accounts. Methodical, devastating. But day 2 broke hearts. Statements from ex-girlfriends confirmed the same cycle. Charm, control, violence. Then Claire took the stand. She walked up steady, eyes on the jury. Patricia began gently, then guided her through years of captivity disguised as marriage. "He decided when I woke, when I left the house. I had to text him at every stop. If I was late, I was lying. He read every message, called it love, said he was protecting me. Really, it was control." "Punishment?" Patricia asked. "Silence for days, insults, sometimes pushing, trapping me until he decided I'd learned my lesson." Her voice never wavered. Each answer peeled back another layer of terror. The jury read her journal entries projected on the screen. You could feel the room holding its breath. Then came Thornton's cross-examination. He attacked fast. "Mrs. Carter, you've battled anxiety for years, haven't you? I developed it because of Brandon. But you were medicated before meeting him. For finals week. I wasn't on medication when we met." He smirked. "Maybe you misread normal marital behavior as abuse?" "Sustained," the judge warned. But Thornton pressed on. "You agreed he'd manage finances, didn't you?" "I didn't agree to be cut off from every account or beg for grocery money." "You could have opened your own." "I tried." He called it betrayal and threatened me. He flashed smiling photos of her at parties. "You don't look abused here." Those were events he required me to attend. I smiled because I knew what happened if I didn't. 2 hours of badgering. Claire never broke. When she stepped down, pale but unshaken, the jury's faces told the truth. They believed her. The next day, Patricia played my recording. Brandon's voice, calm and chilling. "I'm a lawyer, Amber. I know how to make someone look unstable. How to bleed them dry till they give up." Gasps filled the courtroom. His own words, his own arrogance. Thornton tried damage control. He was venting hypothetically. Patricia's closing cut that to pieces. He wasn't hypothesizing, he was confessing. He did everything he bragged about: financial control, isolation, psychological torture. This wasn't frustration, it was evidence. 7 hours of jury deliberation felt like years. I paced hallways, replaying every moment. Then the verdict. Count 1, domestic battery, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Unlawful restraint, guilty. Claire's hand crushed mine. Dorothy sobbed. Brandon's face went from white to red to stunned disbelief. He'd truly thought he was untouchable. Judge Morrison's gavel fell. Sentencing in 30 days, defendant to remain in custody. The bailiffs cuffed him. His eyes found Claire's, no longer predatory, just hollow. Outside, microphones swarmed. Patricia made a short statement about justice, but the cameras wanted Clare. She stepped up, her voice steady. "For years I lived in fear. Fear of making him angry. Fear no one would believe me. Today that fear ends. Not just for me, but for every woman who sees that abusers can be held accountable." She looked straight into the lenses. "If you're trapped like I was, it's not your fault. You're not crazy. Reach out. Get help. You deserve to live without fear." 1 month later, at sentencing, Brandon showed no remorse. Judge Morrison handed down 12 years. Not enough for the decade he'd stolen, but more than most abusers ever face. Claire didn't cheer. She just exhaled, lighter than I'd ever seen her. That night, we gathered again at Helen's, the same group that had once prayed for survival, now celebrating justice. Claire lifted a glass of cider. "Thank you," she said. "Amber, for believing me. Helen, for arming me with knowledge. Officer Lewis, for listening. Patricia, for giving my story power. Mom, for standing beside me even when it hurt. I couldn't have done this alone." Helen smiled. "You didn't have to. Abusers thrive in silence. We win when we speak, when we stand together." Later, under the stars, Claire whispered, "Remember when we used to wish on stars as kids?" I remember. I used to wish for silly things. Now I'd wish that no woman ever has to go through what I did, that every girl grows up knowing her worth. 3 months later, she began studying to be a trauma therapist. My nursing license was reinstated. Helen's organization received a grant to expand its shelters. Dorothy started volunteering, teaching parents what signs to watch for. And I, finally, understood something vital. Silence helps the abuser. Witnessing saves lives. Sometimes the only barrier between a victim and destruction is someone who says, "I believe you." 1 year after the verdict, Claire and I stood before a mirror. Not children anymore, not searching for illusions, just facing who we'd become. "Do you see her?" she asked. "The woman I used to be?" I looked closely. "I see her. In your posture, your eyes. But I also see someone new." "Not new," Claire said softly. "Just more myself." He tried to erase me, but she was always there, waiting for the light. We stood side by side, reflections finally whole, two sisters who'd faced darkness and walked back into the sun. The mirror, at last, told the truth. And this time, we could see it.